So I've been threatening to do this video for a while but not getting around to it, and also partly because of the ETF and this crawling price action. I wanted to wait until we had the play out of the ETF before saying too much. So from previous updates I've given, I was looking initially from this point, but obviously with confirmation, which was the monthly supply for the possibility of rejection. And we've always got swing points that could get taken out, but this was the monthly supply I was looking at. I'll draw it for those who don't follow me and don't know how I would draw it. So I would draw it like that over the two green candles. And we did get a small rejection off the bottom of it, but not really anything significant. I want to leave that in because it gets in the way, but I just keep the levels just in case. We had another monthly level here, which I wasn't looking at on the high time frame, but did coincide with a local entry that I gave for a shorting possibility here. Then within that monthly, we had this 3-day supply right at the top, which was another level I was looking at for possible rejection. And again, we got that, and we got a fairly decent move off that for a lower time frame trader. And then finally, this was this 3-week level that was just missed. And to be fair, I can't remember or haven't checked all the exchanges to know if other exchanges hit it either this time or here. But this was the other, like the 3-week. Again, people who follow me for a while probably know that I quite like the 3-week, because for some reason, when you look back at the history, you can see 3 weeks tend to be respected quite well. So that was my final point of looking for an entry. And obviously we were just a hair short of that, a couple of $100. I did also in the premium channel have a possibility of a swing failure over this dash, the monthly high there, and actually the 2022 high. So we had quite a lot of confidence on this chart for looking for shorts, and I haven't really been looking for longs, or I haven't been looking for longs at all since here. Ether gave one because it gave a wick down into here, and it also had a 3-day and a weekly in there, so I was more confident of getting the Ether long, but it was so quick that unless you had a limit you wouldn't have achieved that. Okay, and so since the ETF we've had this decent sized drop, but we're still in the range, and you can clearly see there's this weekly range on the weekly chart, weekly low, and then it's bounded by this monthly level that we've had previously at 43.8. So I'm still watching that weekly range, and to me this isn't, it's not a confirmed breakdown by any stretch of the imagination. I see a lot of people have called, the 49k level for shorts, and a lot of people are now saying short at various points back in this section, and depending on the points that people are choosing just seem to be depending on their style of trading. Like for me, it would be up higher than a lot of other people, but 46k is where we've got this daily supply starting. We've got I think there's a point of control there, there's a 61 fib, and something else at the older yearly level, maybe something else even as well. So I want to alert just before that, just to see if it gets up there. Other people are looking for shorts a bit lower, either on retests of the top of the range here, assuming this is a deviation and we're back in the range. So yes, you could end up with a short a bit lower, in the 44 kind of area. And yeah, but while you can look for shorts there, and I don't think there's anything wrong with looking for shorts there, because I do it all the time with entries like this. Is where I have the black crosses, and I should probably add one, in fact, because I have got that possibility of an entry here. I'm actually not that confident at the moment. I would be much more confident if we'd broken down this range. But then even then it becomes complex, because if we'd broken down and we'd have got a bounce off support down here, then it's possible it still takes it out. Because so while we've got this upper range, like I said on the weekly, this for me, we've still got our waves upward. So get the brush. We've got a wave, retracement, wave, retracement, wave. Oh, went overshot there a little bit. So really it has to come down below here before you consider it a proper break of structure on the higher time frame. But obviously we don't want to miss a half price move if it comes. So we're looking at those sort of earlier entries, and then similarly if we can start looking at the lower time frames, you've also got waves like within here, and that's a bit of a dubious one. I don't know, this one's just difficult because I don't know if we can count it that much because it's so choppy. We could end up with a long squeeze, and yeah, it's somewhat harder to judge. So there's a lot of similarities in the price action here. Let's look back quickly, take all my crap off the chart, to what we've had previously in 2018. So there's, like, I keep looking at this from two different perspectives. So one, are we in a similar situation to here, which is what I've kind of been wanting all along, and just trying to judge where that high is. Oh yeah, the high here is at 61 fib as well. I think linear fib. And this, I think, was also the 61 linear fib. And then obviously we had this big drop off that, followed by the COVID dump, which took it all the way back down to a 3-week or weekly demand right at the bottom here. Is that possible? For sure, it's possible. It's possible, you know, and here, you know, we get various corrections, and as everyone knows, I'm not an Elliott wave expert, but if you've got an A, B, C correction, you can have a triangle correction like this, or you can have a zigzag correction. So there is no reason also why this couldn't drop to here as an A, B, C with a zigzag correction. And again, I don't have enough understanding of Elliott waves, but I've got a feeling that if there's a triangle, then there can be, the next one can be a zigzag and vice versa, but I could be wrong on that. Anyway, it's not how I trade, so that's just a thought. But, you know, for me, it's certainly not out of the realms of possibility that we go back down here again, although everybody's saying we won't because of the ETF. Similarly, one of the difficulties we have as well, looking at the high time frames, is that we have a 3-month demand now in the middle here. I'll take these alerts off or hide them. So again, that's the first place I'd be looking for a real decent bounce, but it can also go straight through there because this is not a strong demand because it hasn't been proven to break supply. So the preference is to come back to the start of the impulse and look for a long entry somewhere down here, assuming we're going to make a higher low, or again down in annual demand and back in this section. And I know there's a lot of people that won't like hearing that, but those for me are very real possibilities. I think even BNB kind of showed a similar, it was a lot quicker in getting back up to here, but I was looking at it a while ago and thinking it actually showed a lot of similarities, but I think it only made a monthly demand in the middle here rather than 3 month, but then it did go straight back through it. So that kind of proves the point on this being a weak part of structure. And I also don't really like that the red candles set out from these two greens because that weakens it further. But anyway, that would be the initial long entry. Back to what I was saying over here. So we have the similarities, potential similarities with the top here in what we're starting to form here. But then also there's some similarities with this. And I would have preferred it if we'd stayed above this weekly zone that have formed here, but it's still in range. So we had a weekly demand when the price was up above, and now we have it flipped into a weekly supply. So certainly locally I'm more bearish than I am bullish, but there's nothing confirmed in my opinion. And you will remember, if you've been around this long, that there were a lot of people who were supremely bearish all through here. You know, we'd had a lower high, and then I think we didn't swing fail the high here, but we had this sort of wick up, and there's a lot of people who were saying short this to hell at this point. But one of the observations I was making was until we broke this weekly candle, I wouldn't be bearish. And as you can see here quite clearly, we never did. And we tapped down into it multiple times and spent a significant length of time here. Sorry, just want to check who's texting me. Okay, not important. We spent a significant length of time here, many weeks, but then we did always hold this. So I'm looking for kind of similar structure to form now. And like I say, it's not exactly the same from how the demand is forming perspective. But like I say, I can't be fully bearish at this point. Nothing wrong with looking for a short here. Preferable, you know, then your target obviously remains to be seen. But again, like where is, so what I have looked at is on the 8-hour chart, just to have some point of reference for the bottom of this consolidation, is this 8-hour that sort of we've had a bunch of wicks through but haven't, you know, so this isn't an area I would have longed anyway. I think it's just people trying to front run 40k, so I don't love it anyway, but we've had some wicks through this, but we're still holding it as support. So if I start seeing significant closes below this level, and then obviously we take bearing in mind these wicks, and we can still swing fail those wicks and come back up again, I won't be particularly bearish on the macro. You can see I've got a bunch of diagonals going on just because I like to observe them. I don't really trade them, but I just think it's kind of interesting when it starts building trend lines. Again, a lot of people will probably think, oh yeah, we'll take out these trend line stops, and we'll probably take out these trend line stops up here, or we could take out these trend line stops. What I do find, I think from history, is when we start to fall, we don't really go back for stops. And I remember making that observation when we were at these highs. People again were saying, you know, they kept saying, oh, we're going to go and take these stops out before we dump, and we never did. So don't be so, yeah, so while price does go to seek liquidity, if it has enough liquidity, it won't seek it anymore. So yeah, don't be so hell-bent on thinking that it has to go up to that upper supply. And in fact, like if I'm short biased, that would be my preference, for it to just roll off a cliff at this point in time, rather than going up for the retest, because the retest allows everybody back in. And see here, you know, it did go back up for a retest, but then came back up again and took them all out later. But I mean, obviously I did have a decent drop in between. But again, even in this case, it didn't retest right at the top, which is obviously your preferred entry if it gets there. So again, from a supply and demand perspective, I trade zones as and when they're hit, and that doesn't mean they have to be hit. So while I may say that would be my preferred short entry because there's a lot of confluence, etc., etc., it doesn't mean it's ever going to go there. So I will either, you know, I mean, this today even, you know, it had a short entry off this week daily supply that it's put in today, or put in from the weekend. So you could have shorted that earlier today. Definitely my preference would be not to do it after a weekend, although it's a public holiday today, so actually, you know, because normally it would go up and fill a CME gap, and it would probably stop hunt these highs before dropping. But certainly if you see a swing fail of this local range, no reason why you can't take a short there. And like I say, also just keep an eye on local price action at these levels. As to whether I think this is the actual top, let's look at some other charts. So I've already commented that Korea, Japan and China, all those pairs made this annual demand. So, and you know, this kind of just confuses the situation slightly. So you can see they've got a very tiny close just above the 2022 candle, but they are still at the point of a swing failure as well. So it's certainly not definitive, but it's something to be aware of, because, and again, it's something quite commonly I see in FX, they'll make these new demands and then just pound straight off them. So we've got that on Korea, on yen. Yen has a bit of space to go and test that. And the Chinese one, which I don't look at very often, but is basically the same. On the other hand, the euro closed slightly below and has swing failed. Obviously the US dollar that we've seen already, pound is on the cusp but also slightly below, and I think that's all of the different currencies. But yeah, it's just to be aware of this structure on Korea particularly, because as you know, I look at Korea quite a lot. Let's go back down to the lower time frames, but again, and so the other thing I should probably comment, obviously these yearly zones are massive, so it doesn't have to bounce off the top, but if we're still being bullish, then it will. And if it doesn't bounce off the top, then obviously I'd start looking at the same sort of structural things that I'd look at on the US dollar pair, you know, the 3-month zone down here, and all the weekly zones that are down the bottom. But at this point in time, Korea, this is the grey level, is holding that yearly level. So that's something to be aware of. And on top of that, it also hasn't broken this local weekly demand that the US dollar pair closed below this black dashed line. This hasn't, and was significantly stronger like in this last wick, which we saw in the premium. Where is it? So which has come down a lot now. Get off the log chart for that, but again, something we've seen previously and generally worth keeping an eye on, because if Korea starts to push, then things can change quite rapidly. But yeah, so the 2018 top, the 2021 top, I think that's the first top, not the actual top. Let me just check that. Excuse me. So the first top, yeah, so it was really pushing in the first top and then didn't push in the sort of follow-up top, or it did a little bit, but not so much. But yeah, now you can see that we've lifted off this long consolidation, and the premiums come up again a bit, and this weirdly does follow a bit of TA, so I always sort of again think it's worth watching. And you know, it's made a yearly demand as well, for what it's worth. But it's just worth keeping an eye on, because the structures of Korea can push prices higher than you expect, and or break structures. But having said that, it can happen in both directions, so it's not a definitive thing. But what I have noticed is if Korea hasn't hit a level that I expect it to hit, if I was just doing TA on that chart alone, then you tend to find that it'll either die off while the US dollar pair stays stable, or it will drag the US dollar pair further into a zone. So that's always something that's worth considering. But yeah, the main thing on this is that annual demand, just to be aware of that. And then again, like even if we do get a dip in, I would want to be aware of the yen pair, just if that hits. And it's not, you know, that's like I say, a bit lower down, you know, and the yen pair, for example, here at the lows didn't quite hit, so I don't find the yen pair I don't consider such a good indicator as the Korean pair, but I wouldn't mind being just aware of what the market's doing when this hits. But again, you can see the Asian pairs are just stronger in general. You know, China's not so much. China's kind of trying to flip that weekly as well, just there. Anyway, something to be aware of. Okay, and then moving on. So GBTC Grayscale. So Grayscale's closed today, and they did change they kept the same ticker, but they changed the exchange. But thankfully, they gave the data back, and they did delete it for a day. And I thought, well, that's great. And again, this also created that annual demand, and has bounced off it. And so when we talk about these annual demands, like just because it's made an annual demand doesn't mean necessarily it's going to make a higher high over that high. But for me, it just means I want to, of the candle that's created. Oh, actually, no, sorry, I correct myself. This hasn't created an annual demand. It has closed slightly below. But I think I just drew the level in because that's what it found as support once it had opened above with the gap. But anyway, like it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take this out, or it can. But it's just would want it just to take out the green candles high at least. So again, on Korea, arguably let's go back to Korea just so we can make the point. You know, it's bounced off the annual level and it's taken out that high. So for me, it's essentially, it can be considered to have played out. It doesn't have to just keep going forever, but obviously if it's an annual level, it might. So, but, so arguably it's played out, but it's still consolidating on top. But anyway, so Grayscale lacks clarity. You know, there's not much supply left now. Is it going to take out these two? Very possibly. Is it going to hold? Yeah, I shouldn't have drawn that in. I can take that out. Is it going to hold this annual level? Possibly as well. But you know, it has had a 5% drop not open today, so it's hard to judge like what it's going to do from here, whether it's going to make a lower high. But we're just at that point now where you're starting to look for the possibility of shorts if it's going to make a lower high, but the overall structure is up. Higher lows, higher lows, higher lows. So while we expect some sort of correction retracement here, this structure is to take out. You can see that I had the channel high and apparently I didn't have the channel low. It could also work its way up here if it wanted to, and that would be kind of next type of resistance. Ethereum. So now, yeah, I kind of scanned through all these before, so I'll try and do this a bit more quickly. But so Grayscale's hit monthly supply. The large caps, which I think is mostly Bitcoin. I think it used to be a bit more varied, but I think it's mostly Bitcoin these days, has also hit monthly supply, and it's starting to come through local 3-day demand. You can see it's starting to look a bit ropey on Friday. All of these I think have a 3-month demand or monthly demands or whatever, but lower. So again, I don't necessarily expect them to crash to hell, although anything's possible in crypto. But we do have a lot of confluence for this being the overall top, so certainly worth looking for shorts. You know, it's not quite at the log 61 fib and miles off the linear, but we are in that monthly supply. Don't really need to look at ETC because that's quite random, but you know, even Litecoin, you know, and BCH, which were the ones that were really pushing before, it's in monthly supply. We're in 2 monthly supply there, and it's coming down now, it's back in demand. BCH, similar, finally hit monthly supply. So all the Grayscale stuff is kind of supporting like market wide a bigger retracement. We had the BTC US dollar longs on Bitfinex, which were going up since 2021 really, but had really pumped since 2022. That has obviously, whoever was buying those has started closing them for what it's worth, because obviously Bitfinex isn't really as relevant as it was all the way back here when it actually really mattered what was happening. But just for what it's worth, I won't go through all those. US dollar dominance is probably just one of the ones that I'm just slightly more dubious about. This is just a mess because I was charting the lower time frames, but it's difficult because they're not necessarily as reliable. But you know, we're still in the local downtrend, you know, supporting the fact that BTC is still in an uptrend, and it does still have some space if it's going to come down to test demand properly. However, has bounced off a previous SR level, so like doesn't follow my rules exactly, but something to be aware of and hit and miss. You know, this could start moving up from here. And the other, you know, the other thing on this obviously is it's come underneath the trend lines, which isn't great for it either. But there's the trend lines on a log scale, the trend lines on a linear scale are obviously still miles away as well. So, you know, the dark trend line was one I had originally, and I tend to like to use the original low, and you know, this just being a deviation below the trend line, but obviously now we've got a bit more than a deviation, and then if I extended the trend line out so it took into account the deviation, we're below even that as well. So that's not great, but like I say, it does have this potential support. The other ones make it slightly more confusing again, just because we have, this is the with USDC and DAI, and this is in monthly demand, very close to the 61 fib. But again, like I probably would have preferred it slightly lower if I was being OCD. Oh, here's the Livermore that we're looking at previously before the previous pump. But anyway, like the 6 month would be my perfect entry for this. So again, like I still do think there is a possibility that with this dips lower, you know, whether it comes all the way up into supply first before doing that, I'm not sure at this point. And similarly, the one with this also included BUSD, which is no longer. So I guess the difference now should be the same as the previous chart. However, this was just relevant from the perspective, take those out now, that again, it had falling into the 6 month demand. And that's when we first started seeing, you know, the volatility start to increase on Bitcoin. So just for what it's worth, there is some confluence on the US dollar pairs, but the Tether one just not quite there for me. Because yeah, wouldn't mind this, but it's a fairly significant drop actually. I think for it to get there alts would have to pump a lot, Ether would have to pump a lot, and Bitcoin would have to pump a lot. So maybe it's just not realistic at the moment, or maybe we're just going to have a lot more sideways first. Total, I've commented already, hit monthly supply, and is still trying to hold these weekly zone. This is a bit of a cleaner weekly and more similar to that one that I was referring to back in this consolidation here back in May 2020 before the pump. And there's something else I wanted to comment on about this as well. I'll get back to that. But, you know, again, has hit monthly supply, total 2. So total 2 and I've commented a few times, and total 3, again, just aren't quite there for me. Okay, so we're in a daily zone here, but, you know, could Ether go higher on this basis? Possibly. Could it be alts that take these higher? Also possible. So again, the confidence not quite there for me on total or total 3. So total 3 again is in this daily. I think that was a lower time frame possible top that it could be swing failing. Yeah, so again, like, you know, this has held weekly demand. It hasn't made a new weekly demand like a lot of the other ones have, but still holding for now. And then I discovered others recently that somebody else posted. So this apparently is the top 10 total crypto market cap, excluding the top 10. So again, this has come up to a resistance, but could be higher. So could we see a bit more from Ether and alts? Very possibly. Doesn't necessarily coincide with what I think about the Ether chart right now, but we'll get to that. I'll do that in a separate video later. BTC dominance like fell off a cliff with the dump, but again back in monthly demand now. And again, I don't love looking at this because obviously dominance can go up even if Bitcoin goes down. It just means that alts die more. So, but again, it's back in demand. It has made a new weekly supply, which is not that promising for Bitcoin. Ether dominance I'm just gonna have to go into separately with the looking at Ether, because there's pros and cons of this, and I'm quite unsure what this is doing right now, to be honest. But anyway, we'll get to that separately. Others dominance also in monthly supply, but still holding demand. So I guess, I mean, the general thing of all this is everything is, or the majority of things are in supply, except possibly for ones that include Ether and alts. But nothing really yet has broken any local demand for me to be like, you know, supremely bearish. So DeFi did get an extra pump after the dump, but again has just come back straight into monthly supply, or 2 monthly supply in that case. And then finally we've got the equities related things. So Bitto, ProShares Bitcoin strategy, didn't quite hit the zone, but it's close enough, and it has dropped, you know, sort of 5%. So a lot of these things started dropping as the stock started dropping at the end of last week. Coinbase hit weekly supply and is actually, so look, on the stocks we are seeing things start to try and break a little bit of local demand, but I think they're all closed today. Let me just check, because the US markets are closed today. So yeah, these are still Friday candles, so it's hard to know whether they're just going to pick up support at the last minute, and probably depends a lot on what Bitcoin does between now and then. Square, I don't know really how relevant that is, so I won't talk about that. MicroStrategy is obviously a big one, and that had a significant drop, but also has the annual demand. So it's dropped into that, and that then becomes harder, because at this point, you know, because all the way through, you know, it can drop all the way down here and still be bullish and still hold the annual level. But you know, this really, I'd like to see what happens when it hits this monthly, the first monthly level, and if it starts to come through, then it's probably going to be in for a bigger correction. But even then, it hasn't got through. It's got through a weekly demand, filled a gap, but yeah, it's still fairly early days for saying this is going to do anything and take out any stops or take out any of these supports that it's got lower down. But did have a 9% drop. Mara again is another one that's had a significant drop, hit the 3-month level, dropped hard off it, 15% drop. Riot, 10% drop. This didn't actually make a higher high, but had already hit the monthly level from back in July. Oh, that seems like such a long time ago now. But anyway, yeah, so these sometimes can act as lead indicators, but they've been slightly more erratic recently, I think, because the ETF's been sort of swaying what Bitcoin does. HUT is another one, which I think miners mostly, again, had in July made the high, but didn't make a higher high. And it's coming back down, so they kind of will be interesting to watch. And then finally, we've got BTC up and down. So BTC up, again, might be a one worth watching for confluence. If we get the retest on Bitcoin, did make a slightly more significant weekly supply, has closed below those local zones, but again, needs to break demand for this to be considered strong supply, and hasn't yet. So so this isn't the equivalent of that consolidation that we were talking about, whereas the first possible entry I'd look at on Bitcoin, the BTC up, so BTC up I believe is 3 times margin on Binance. So again, I haven't looked at this properly for a while, but it used to, because it does bigger moves, I think because of the 3 times effect, it can again also be a bit of a lead indicator, because it will do that bigger move as a result of the 3 times. That may not make any sense, but again, like a lot of these I look at, because we obviously do have manipulation and sometimes lack of clarity on closes and things like that. I do like to look at some of these in case they all point another direction. So BTC up, yeah, has hit a supply, but is again, sorry, I should go back to that. It's not anywhere near the monthly level that Bitcoin is at. So it's actually moved up a lot more slowly in the bigger picture, which arguably if it's 3 times you would think it should move up more, but again, I'm not sure about the ratios and I haven't analysed it in full. Just wanted to look at that trend line. So I drew the trend line as a channel on the log chart, but actually on the linear chart it's kind of worked out quite nicely on the high, but that might be luck rather than judgment. Anyway, that's just something to be aware of, that this is a bit more of a significant negative close than Bitcoin has had. BTC down is still falling off a cliff, and is still, this actually, the flip side of this is this still looks more bearish than BTC would in inverse, because BTC would sort of be here somewhere. So again, that's kind of interesting, but also just a bit conflicting against BTC up. So yeah, still some slight confusion there. And Ether, just while we're here, again, is just really reflecting the same on Ether. We've still got this channel. It's rejected the immediate supply again, but still has a weekly demand below. Ether down again, looks much worse, not surprisingly, and hasn't really retracted. If this is the top, this hasn't really shown it at all on Ether down yet. But possibly people aren't just trading these that much anymore. Anyway, so that's all the kind of related stuff. And what else? CME is probably the only thing I haven't touched on. And again, this is basically in the same point as Bitcoin US dollar is that it's come up into this monthly zone here. I want to draw the low of that zone in again. For some reason it is no longer there. So it's come up into that monthly zone, and it's swing failed the high of the zone here, and this has actually gone into the 3-week supply. So that's kind of, was kind of the perfect entry that I was really looking for. That Bitcoin US dollar didn't quite give. So that's that. So are we going to drop, so for me the critical thing is, are we going to start falling below this weekly zone? This is back to the original chart, obviously. Are we going to start falling below this weekly range? And if we start doing that, if we create supply, sure. If we flip this into a more significant supply, but it was, this is not dissimilar even to this 3-week we had here again, where everybody was being super bearish, and it did, you know, this did give a close slightly below, below there, but then did come back up inside and then held it on a retest on the lower time frame. So just something to be aware of, like that while you may get some big red candles, until we actually get those closes below the range, it's still a range. So, and that's why I'm, yeah, like I said, I'm not overly bearish, but would be looking for a possibility of a short here, possibility of a short there if it gets up to the 3 week. And, you know, who knows, maybe it's even going to go significantly higher. Like there's nothing that tells me this is a macro short yet. On the downside, like for bounce levels, this was kind of one I had previously on the much lower time frames that it just never came back to, and you know, it's much significantly less likely that it will bounce in this little circle now. Let me try and get my chart back to so we've got a whole bunch of 3 day, 5 day. So the pink is 5 day, the purple is 3 day, the blue is 2 day or 1 day. It's just a mess through here. So yeah, so the initial looking for a possibility of a bounce just off the top, with the major risk here that it's going to wick and take out a lot of these lows. That's a level that's worth watching, because that will take out all the lows, and this is something, and given we are acting a lot more like FX these days, this is very, very much something that FX would do, just come down and just tap and take out the lowest wick of here and then go straight back up again. So that's something that's worth considering. Then obviously the 3 month below, so the top of the 3 month is the first place to look at the brown level. This black cross is where the 12 hour is the first one immediately inside, and then we've got a weekly zone in that, which would be the start of this sort of up move. So ideally, I guess, like if you're very bullish, you'd probably want it to bounce a bit higher. I need to kind of do some more fibs on this, I think, because I think I did them, but maybe deleted them because it kept going up and kept having to move them every 5 seconds. Okay, let's just do a fib on this. Excuse the real mess on my chart. I just need to, I think I was doing it off this low, because that previous low was an overshoot by the derivatives. So yeah, that red circle again was just above the 61 fib, or possibly just, yeah, just above it, the 61 fib. So again, just worth considering, you know, because we could just get a tap off the top of that if price is still being very, very bullish. And then the 70 fib would be around where the black cross is, and then deeper, obviously. It's going to go to the deeper fibs. That was on the log scale. On the linear scale, okay, yeah, so on the linear scale, this circle is closer to the 61, it's actually a little bit higher, it's between the 61 and the 70, which is generally a nice zone for a bounce, or we've got the 78 in that monthly. So that's just the initial wave. Then if I fib the whole thing, if we assume this whole move is going to correct, the 61.8 would align quite nicely with the weekly inside the 3 months, so I quite like that as a level. And then there's a 3 week down here which never got tested, and then this monthly at the bottom, or 2 monthly that never got tested. Or I know, sorry, it did get tested locally, but could, you know, if we're going to dump the whole way down, could make the high low. I don't know if I really like that one, actually. I'd probably end up, I'll cross that bridge if we come to it, but if we played out the similar black swan thing to 2080 or 2020, then that 3 week, or that weekly at the bottom, known as a 3 week at the bottom, could be where we could get a bounce. So anyway, but if we'll cross the bridge if we come to it, if we get all the way back down there before everybody starts crying that I'm being far too bearish. Like I say, like this is just for me levels I look at for bounces. They are not necessarily levels I expect to be hit, and that I just say we'll just do price action as we go. If we look at the log fibs, so I think, yeah, there was a reason I kind of like this zone, because again, it was a 3 week, it was a 2 week and a 3 week that hadn't been tested. It would potentially take out this a monthly low, which I want to make is a monthly low, so I want to make it dash, because I'm making my monthly lows in dash now, and would fill the CME gap from here. I thought there might have been one lower actually. I'm not sure, I may not have them all in here, but would fill the significant CME gaps that have been left behind. So anyway, those are the zones I'll look at if we get down there, but everybody likes the lower time frame anyway. So like I say, we're still holding this weekly range, and until we break that, I can't really be particularly bearish. And you know, if we start breaking that, oh, where's the brush? So you know, whether we come up here and do the obvious and then go down to here, or whether we just fall off a cliff around here, firstly I just want to see a reaction here. Then if this forms into a supply, then we need to see that reject, and that's when you're starting your downtrend. But until then, this is not, you know, this is still very much an uptrend, and while this is an absolute mess and it's really annoyingly hard to tell, and in fact actually I prefer Korea. Let's go and have a look at Korea. No, Korea actually isn't much. It's slightly better, but not loads better, but at least it's slightly more obvious consolidation here, which is why I'm more inclined to look at that top of the US dollar pair. But again, until we break that and on more than a wick, then we see, so you know, you've got to see the lower highs come in on the high time frame. So until we see this, oh, what happened there? Until we see this come down, hit that somewhere, and then get put in the lower high, it's not a downtrend on the macro level. Yes, we're in a lower time frame downtrend here, and we could start seeing this, but you know, that might still just hold this and still be bullish. So that's just to be a bit careful of that before following or assuming crazy targets all the way down here, and it depends whether you're a trader or a holder, but there is nothing really as yet that's pointing towards this being a massive drop. Anything else to say? Not really. From the bear side, I guess the biggest issue is the swing fail of that annual level, if it's a swing fail. And you know, I was looking at this, you know, from the bear's perspective. I try and look from the bear and the bull perspective, but from the bear perspective, you know, if that does end up as a swing fail of that level, then very likely we're going to get a swing fail at the bottom level, possibly down into this 13,000 that nobody wants. But yeah, cross that bridge when we come to it. Oh yeah, and then so one other thing I wanted to just look at or point out, and again, just looking at those pattern similarities from previously. So you can see that in the current PA, we had this sort of grind up, and now we're having this bigger correction here. This is not dissimilar to kind of what we had here, this grind up and then this potentially bigger correction. So that's why I say again, I'm not fully bearish. You know, that while I'm sure at this point in time everybody was like, oh, the price is going to hell and this is a bit of a cleaner demand, and in fact it never even came back to test that demand after the wick. I'm sure everybody here, price was going, oh, we swing failed this level, it's a deviation, we're going to dump. We then got another move. So that doesn't, I'm not discounting that, and I just need to see the patterns play out. Yeah, so anyway, that's probably slightly longer than I anticipated for this video, but there you go. Any questions, get into chat and ask me.